Hello and welcome to Brussels, to the European Parliament, where we look ahead to May the 22nd and what could be the most exciting and dramatic European election ever. It could also, for the UK, be the last European election ever, if we do have a referendum and if the British people do vote to leave the EU. All the headlines over the past year have been made by UKIP. They nearly won the Eastleigh by-election. They had stunning successes in the county council elections. At times it seemed Nigel Farage can do no wrong.
He's the future Prime Minister of England. He is a political messiah of the 21st century.
And as UKIP's support has grown, so has opposition to them. Just look at what happened when Mr Farage went to a meeting in Margate recently. The other parties have been trying to work out how to counter the UKIP surge. We'll definitely have an in-out referendum, says Mr Cameron. We won't. Well, we probably won't, says Mr Miliband. And the pro-EU movement has gradually been finding its voice. Lib Dem Danny Alexander at a vineyard in Kent, flying the flag for Europe. The battle lines are drawn for probably the most important European elections we've ever had. And with us here in our Brussels studio, 4 people who want your vote on May the 22nd. Dan Hannon of the Conservatives, what do you say to Danny Alexander when he says that vineyard in Kent and people say 3 million jobs like it depend on our membership of the European Union?
Well, I'm glad to get rid of this 3 million jobs point, which has been even disowned by the EU-funded academic who originally came out with it. It is extraordinary that Lib Dems are still using this figure decades after its authors have given up on it. Look, we are a trading country, and we need to trade with the places where the customers are. Now, every continent on the planet is now growing except Europe. We are confined in a customs union. That's the only place that's shrinking, and that is no place for us. No one, by the way, is suggesting that the single market would be prejudiced if we pulled out of the political structures of the EU. Every country in Europe, whether or not they're in the European Union or not, enjoys free movement of goods and services. Norway does, Macedonia does, Turkey does, Switzerland does. You know, the idea that Britain wouldn't get the same kind of deal that every other European country except Ukraine and Belarus has, I just don't believe.
So we should leave the European Union?
We should pull out of the political aspects of it. We should have a free trade deal along the lines of what the Swiss do, trading with Europe, governing ourselves, and critically being able to rediscover those growing markets across the sea, to raise our eyes to further horizons and recapture that global vocation that our fathers took for granted.
Richard Howard, you represent the Eastern region, which includes Essex, for Labour. What do you say to Dan Hannon?
Well, first of all, if we're going to do assess academic research, let's assess the latest one, which shows that those jobs do arise because of our membership of the European Union. You may want the cuckoo-clock economy of Switzerland for Britain. I happen to think, and Labour happens to think, that we are a major industrial trading nation and we can do better. And I say this, Phil, whether it's the Tory Eurosceptics or UKIP, that is the recipe that they offer to Britain. And as far as Nigel is concerned, right, to quote Monty Python, he's not a messiah, he's just a very naughty boy.
Nigel, what do you
agree with that.
What do you say to that vineyard in Kent, who seem to think that their trade would dry up with Europe if we left the EU?
The very same vineyard who 2 years ago manufactured some wine, and they weren't allowed to put wine on the bottle. They had to write an alcoholic beverage made from grapes imported from outside the European Union, which just about, and I in fact held a non-wine tasting here with their product. It was delicious, which in a sense sums it up. Look, looking at Danny Alexander, talking about the fact we need to be in a political union to go on buying and selling goods from each other, reminds me that virtually nobody that is in politics today has ever been in business. I was in an international trading business for 20 years, buying and selling copper, lead, zinc, aluminium, all over the world. The European market is important to us. Of course it's important to us. You know, we do lots of business with France and lots of business with Germany. But the growing markets, and I think Dan was alluding to this, the growing economies of the world are, of course, the Far East, the BRICS countries, call them what you will. And what we find ourselves in is a political union that inhibits our ability to open up trading links with the emerging parts of the world. And it's very interesting, when you talk about a cuckoo-clock economy, well, do you know what? They're rich. They've got more free trade deals with the 30 leading economies in the world that are outside the European Union than we've got. Oh, and they get referendums on things. So I'm not too worried about being
per capita to the EU than we do.
They sell far more to the next door neighbours in Europe. We do not need to be in political union to go on doing business. You know. And just a simple statistic, we sell about, just in rough numbers, we sell about 100 billion pounds worth of goods to the EU every year. It's a very important market. It's declining, but it's still important. They sell us about £150 billion worth of goods every year. And I've never met anybody here, whether it's Giscard d'Estaing or Kinnock when he was Commissioner, I've never met anybody that has said if Britain leaves political union, they would not want to go on having a free trade deal with us.
What do you say to the argument, Sir Graham Watson, that the European Union was the future once, but it's now a kind of outdated concept, and in the modern global world that we all live in now, it's looking a little bit old-fashioned?
No, I don't think it's old-fashioned at all. I find it amazing that a UKIP and a Conservative MEP can sit here and say that we would not be disadvantaged if we were not part of it. Of course we would. It's all very well to talk about the Norwegians or the Swiss, but they pay far more into the European Union budget for the privilege of trading with the other countries than they would if they were outside, and it's likely Britain would be in the same position. Moreover, they have no say whatsoever in the framing of all the laws that govern trade, quite apart from the jobs and the investment we get. What would Dan Hannan and Nigel Farage say about the security we get from being in the European Union? The fact that our police forces work together with police forces across frontiers, that our magistrates work together with judiciaries in other countries to crack paedophile rings, to deal with the cyber criminals, to deal with the money launderers. All of these things are what they call political Europe, but what is essential to our security.
We are not advocating isolation, all right? We are advocating that we trade with Europe, we cooperate with Europe. Interpol was set up in the 1920s.
Yes,
right?
and it doesn't work, whereas Europol does, because it's on a different basis.
With other countries, and we want to go on doing that. What we do not want are structures of the European Union taking over our criminal justice system, because effectively that's where we're going.
As Nigel says, we've got the Hague Convention, we've got Interpol, we've got extradition treaties, we recognise time spent in another country's prison as part of your sentence. All of these things happen globally and happened without the European Union. And as for the investment point, since the in-out referendum was announced a little bit over a year ago, inward investment into the UK has been slightly more than 10 times as much as into France.
Point. Don't get off the security point. Your Home Secretary wanted to pull us out of the European arrest warrant.
Right.
Your Home Secretary has thrown the European Police College, based in the South East, out of Britain.
Quite right.
Your Home Secretary does not want cooperation between judiciaries. If we want to deal with internationally organised crime, we need to work together with other countries.
Of the European arrest warrant. I and Nigel were both involved in the case of a constituent of yours who spent 2 years of his life on trial in Greece, 11 months of it in one of the nastiest prisons in Europe, because of a case of straightforward mistaken identity. The case was thrown out within 5 minutes as soon as it came to court. That boy who had been in Greece celebrating his A-levels came back to find that the people he'd been celebrating with had graduated. How do you give that time back to a young man? That was your European arrest warrant. I'm delighted that we're pulling out of it.
The Conservatives in Westminster and the European Parliament blocked measures that we put forward, Labour supported, to ensure that women who were victims of domestic violence and had court orders to prevent their partners harassing or threatening them would have that protection overseas as well as in Britain.
There are lots of things we can learn from other European countries, culturally and many other ways. But the one thing I think we should pride ourselves on is that since Magna Carta, we've actually had an evolving, developing criminal justice system that is exceptionally far above anything in the European Union, because it doesn't accept common law. It doesn't accept the presumption of innocence before guilt.
It's very difficult to get worded, but I think we can pray proud of that and much more than that. And the difference between those of us who want to reform Europe but stay inside and UKIP and hardline Eurosceptics in the Tories is that my pride in Britain is that we can actually help others learn from us, and I'm not frightened by cooperating or dialogue with others. I think we're the true patriots.
Only 2 countries
we're the people that have true pride in Britain.
Only 2 countries out of 28 have a common law tradition. They're not going to adopt our system.
OK, well, let's hear from the Green Party.
The Greens have got a vision that puts people and their environment at the centre of policies.
The big question in these European elections is going to be in or out, isn't it? So with the Greens, are we in or are we out?
Well, the Greens definitely want to remain as part of Europe. And now it faces an even bigger challenge, that of climate change. We've seen that in the flooding. We can achieve far more as part of a 28-member state region than we can as a single entity. Vote Green, because otherwise you're voting for nothing. The UKIP, they're full of hot air. It's like a barroom conversation.
I say that, but they seem to be dominating the conversation, and maybe the Greens are getting squeezed out of the European conversation because of the rise of UKIP.
But if you examine what UKIP is holding up as an alternative, there's nothing. It's a complete vacuum. So, I mean, why bother voting for a UKIP MEP who never does anything in the Parliament, who never turns up but always collects his money?
Nigel Farage, what do you say to Keith Taylor?
Well, he's wrong, isn't he? Actually, the way to make money here is to be here as much as you can. And what viewers need to understand is every day you're here, you sign on, you get €300 tax-free. So the fact I'm not here very much means I'm costing the taxpayer.
But he says when you are here, you don't do very much.
Well, you know, look, let's just get this straight. You know, we've got 4 parties represented in the South East who want to be members of the European Union and want to reform it and change it. All right? I don't agree with that, but that's what they do. I'm a member of a party that does not want to be a member of the European Union. We're not deluding ourselves that we're actually going to change anything over here. And OK, you know, the criticism of me is that I've only voted 50% of the time in this Parliament. I'm also leading a national political party, and it's interesting that my voting record, despite the fact Strasbourg's 8 hours from home, is a damn sight better than Nick Clegg's in Westminster.
Voting in fewer than half the votes. You voted in fewer than half the votes.
What are the figures for Clegg, Cameron and Miliband?
Justify your salary on that basis.
Nick Clegg only voted 22% of the time when he was leader of the Lib Dems and not even the Deputy Prime Minister. So if you draw some comparisons as party leaders, I don't think it's too bad.
OK, let's move on to this whole question of the referendum, which is sort of dominating the European conversation. As we know, if the Conservatives win the next general election with an outright majority, Mr Cameron says we will have a referendum, which used to be your party policy not very long ago, didn't it, Sir Graham?
Yeah, we have no problem.
Now you think it's a terrible idea?
No, we certainly don't. In fact, we have legislated in government for a referendum on the next treaty because we believe that there should be a referendum to give the British people another debate. What we are not in favour of is what the Conservatives want, which is a referendum after unilateral negotiation with other countries.
But under Min Campbell's leadership, you did want an in-out referendum.
Yeah, we still want an in-out referendum, and we believe we still want an in-out referendum, and we believe there should be an in-out referendum on the next treaty change.
The referendum, you know, Ed Miliband's been very clear. Our priority is jobs. It's the health service. It's not getting Britain out of the European Union. Yes, if there is a major shift of powers that is proposed at some point, then we will give the in-out referendum. There is now no uncertainty. Labour is a pro-European party. We believe in reforming Europe, but doing so from within.
Let's look at Mr Cameron's position, because he's saying he's going to renegotiate our membership. But whatever the result of that renegotiation, and we don't still know quite what he is going to renegotiate, he's going to recommend people support our continuing membership of the EU. What kind of negotiation is that?
He and I will almost certainly be on different sides when it comes, but he is the one chance we have of getting a referendum. The only way it's going to happen is with a Conservative government
on different sides?
Do you know, we're not a Stalinist party and we have differences of opinion, but I really do want to take on this uncertainty point that Richard just made, which was a really extraordinary thing.
We've already established that, I think.
He said we have to... If you have the David Cameron position, which is a guaranteed referendum by the end of 2026, that causes uncertainty. But the possibility of a vague referendum in the event of an unknown treaty, that doesn't cause any uncertainty at all, which is the position of these. Actually, the idea that it's going to jeopardise the recovery, I'm afraid, just doesn't match the facts. The recovery in the UK pretty much began in January of last year when the in-out referendum was announced. Now, I'm not claiming that it began because of that, but you can't claim that it's damaging to inward investment. Empirically, that's shown to be false. Isn't there a pretty good case, in principle, without knowing how it's going to go, for saying that on an issue of this size, we ought to trust the people?
And the only way we'll ever get a referendum is with an outright Conservative majority, Nigel Farage.
I don't trust any of them. This is Cast Iron Dave. You know, the man who won the last European elections, writing all over the literature, if I ever become Prime Minister, I give you this cast-iron guarantee there'll be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. 2 years ago, he was three-line whipping your backbenchers in Westminster to be against a referendum, and now he's for a referendum.
And Nigel was legislated for it.
It wasn't for the growth of UKIP, we wouldn't even be having this debate. And I think not only has UKIP managed to change the Conservatives' position on a referendum, I think Labour are watching very, very carefully,
Nigel,
because the growth of UKIP support over the last 12 to 15 months has not come from Conservative voters. It has come from Labour voters in the Midlands and the North, and it's come from non-voters re-engaging in the process.
And what it's really all about, Phil, is what kind of country do you want to live in? You know, Liberal Democrats want to live in a generous, open, engaged, tolerant country, outward-looking. We don't want the kind of narrow, nationalistic, cantankerous, crabbed country that Dan Hannan and Nigel Farage are proposing.
I really do have to come back.
We want Britain to be engaged in the European Union, in NATO, in all of these other international bodies. We believe we have things to offer the rest of the world, and that we can best do that through positive membership of the European Union.
I speak French, I speak Spanish, I've lived and worked all over Europe. I believe in an open, generous British political system, and I'm sorry that you're taking politics
to pull us out of our major area of international cooperation.
I remember when you said people who want a referendum can be compared to the Nazis in the Reichstag and the Bolsheviks in the Duma. I was there in the chamber, and I remember when you said Osama bin Laden has done more for European integration than anyone since Jacques Delors. I remember when you said Al Qaeda won David Cameron's era. So for you now to be talking about us being ungenerous, I really think is a bit rich.
Aren't we all missing the point?
Absolutely
aren't we all missing the point? The issue that will dominate these European elections is not the 3 million jobs argument. It's not whether the police college is in Bramshill or not. The issue that will dominate these elections is the fact that we've opened up our doors to southern and eastern Europe to a wave of migration into Britain, which has cut people's wages, doubled youth unemployment, and with which 78% of the population are unhappy. That, I think, is the single biggest issue.
Right, which is that, yes, migrants have come in, they've undercut jobs and they've undercut people's terms, or people feel insecure about that. Labour has supported proper employment rights that would stop that happening. But Nigel and the Conservatives, UKIP and the Conservatives, consististly oppose those rights. In the southeast of England, the region which is a gateway to Europe, that has ports like Southampton, which has students coming to language schools, making a huge difference in places like Canterbury and Brighton. The economy of the southeast is hugely more dependent on Europe than even the rest of the United Kingdom. It's a very, very dangerous game that the Eurosceptics are playing.
2.2 million Brits who are living and working in other parts of the European Union, who are going abroad to work because they can get better salaries.
If people listen to Graham and they decide that they want to be part of what the European Union has turned into, fine. That's going to be final. The people ultimately should decide.
It's been great fun, and thank you for joining us too. We'll see you again soon. Bye for now.